geological shifts. But the layout is what really gets archaeologists scratching their heads. If Giant City Stone Fort was built for defense, it's unlike any other defensive structure from this time period. The walls don't completely enclose a space. They don't have obvious defensive features like bastions or firing positions, and some sections seem to be built more for ceremony than combat. The main wall system covers approximately 260 acres, winding along natural ridges and incorporating existing rock formations in ways that suggest the builders had an intimate understanding of both the landscape and advanced engineering principles. Some sections are built directly on bedrock, others bridge natural gaps between cliff faces, and still others seem to follow lines that have more to do with geometry than topography. Archaeological evidence suggests the site was occupied intermittently over many centuries, with different groups adding their own modifications and improvements to the basic structure. Pottery fragments, stone tools, and fire hearths scattered throughout the enclosure tell stories of people who came here for reasons we can barely imagine. Inside the walls, the landscape is equally mysterious. Natural sandstone formations create towering spires and hidden alcoves that early settlers called Giant City because the rock pillars resembled streets lined with massive buildings. These natural features were clearly important to the original builders, who incorporated them into their overall design rather than working around them. Some of the interior spaces show clear evidence of modification by human hands. Rock surfaces bear carved symbols and petroglyphs that have resisted every attempt at translation. Stone circles mark locations where fires burned regularly, suggesting ceremonial activities that might have continued for generations. Natural caves and overhangs were enhanced with stonework to create what can only be described as outdoor rooms. The defensive theory falls apart when you really examine the structure. Large sections of the wall are barely waist-high, easily crossed by anyone with basic climbing ability. Other sections have gaps wide enough for wagons to pass through. If this was meant to keep enemies out, it would have been spectacularly ineffective. But if it wasn't defensive, what was it? Some researchers propose that Giant City Stone Fort was a ceremonial center, a place where different tribes gathered for religious observances, trade meetings, or seasonal celebrations. The elevated position offers commanding views of the surrounding countryside, making it an ideal location for activities that required both privacy and visibility. The astronomical alignment theory has its proponents too. Certain sections of the wall seem to be oriented towards specific celestial events, suggesting that the builders incorporated solar and stellar observations into their design. Standing in particular locations during solstices or equinoxes creates dramatic shadow effects and sight lines that might have held spiritual significance. Recent ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed even more mysteries. Beneath the visible walls lies evidence of earlier construction phases, suggesting that Giant City Stone Fort evolved over centuries rather than being built all at once. Some underground features appear to be intentionally buried structures, possibly ceremonial chambers or storage facilities that we haven't yet excavated. The construction challenges would have been enormous. Quarrying and transporting massive sandstone blocks across rugged terrain without modern equipment would have required sophisticated planning and coordination. The builders had to understand stress distribution, foundation preparation, and structural engineering principles that wouldn't be formally recognized for centuries. Local Native American oral traditions offer tantalizing clues but no definitive answers. Various tribes have stories about sacred places in this region, locations where spirits gathered or where important ceremonies took place. Some legends speak of ancient peoples who built stone cities in the hills, but the connections to Giant City Stone Fort remain frustratingly vague. Chapter 5: Kincaid Mounds, the political powerhouse. Just when you think Illinois has exhausted its supply of ancient mysteries, along comes Kincaid Mounds to prove you wrong. Nestled along the Ohio River in the far southern tip of the state, this massive archaeological complex once served as one of the most important political and ceremonial centers in the entire Mississippian world. But despite decades of excavation and analysis, Kincaid continues to guard its secrets like a sphinx made of earth and time. What strikes you immediately about Kincaid is its sheer ambition. This wasn't some modest village or ceremonial site built by local communities. This was a major population center, a place where power was concentrated, decisions were made, and influence was projected across hundreds of miles of river valleys and trade routes. At its peak, Kincaid rivaled Cahokia itself in terms of regional importance, yet its story remains largely untold. The site covers over 100 acres and contains at least 11 major mounds, each one representing different phases of construction and different aspects of Mississippian culture. The largest mound rises nearly 40 feet above the surrounding floodplain, a testament to the organizational power required to move thousands of tons of earth one basketful at a time. But unlike Cahokia's monuments, Kincaid's mounds seem designed more for exclusivity than mass gatherings. Archaeological evidence suggests that Kincaid operated as a regional capital, a place where local chiefs and important families maintained residences and conducted the complex business of governing scattered communities throughout the Ohio and Mississippi River systems. The pottery styles, stone tools, and other artifacts found here show connections to sites across the southeast, evidence of a sophisticated trade and diplomatic network. But here's where Kincaid gets really interesting from a political perspective. The site shows clear evidence of social stratification, with elite residential areas, specialized craft production zones, and what appear to be administrative complexes. This wasn't just a place where people lived, it was where they governed, where they made the decisions that affected thousands of lives across the region. The plaza areas are particularly intriguing. These carefully prepared flat spaces could accommodate large crowds for ceremonies, public announcements, or political gatherings. But the design suggests controlled access, places where audiences were managed, and political theater was carefully choreographed. Standing in these plazas today, you can almost feel the weight of ancient political drama that once played out on this earthen stage. The trade networks centered on Kincaid boggle the mind. Artifacts found here include marine shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, stone from Arkansas quarries, and pottery styles from across the southeast. This wasn't just local exchange, it was international commerce on a scale that wouldn't be seen again in this region for centuries after European contact. But what was being traded? Raw materials, certainly, but also ideas, technologies, and political alliances. Kincaid appears to have been a place where different cultural groups came together, where innovations were shared, and where the complex diplomatic relationships that held the Mississippian world together were negotiated and maintained. The construction phases at Kincaid reveal a fascinating story of political evolution. Early mounds were relatively simple, but later additions show increasingly sophisticated architecture and more elaborate ceremonial features. It's as if we're watching a regional power center grow in confidence and ambition over time, each generation adding their own stamp to the political landscape. Recent excavations have uncovered what appear to be specialized administrative buildings, structures that seem designed more for meetings and record-keeping than for ceremonies or residences. These buildings contained unusual concentrations of counting stones, marked pottery vessels, and other objects that suggest some form of accounting or administrative system we don't fully understand. The political implications are staggering. If Kincaid really did function as a regional capital, then the Mississippian world was far more politically sophisticated than most people realize. We're not talking about simple chiefdoms or loose tribal confederations, but about complex political entities with administrative systems, diplomatic protocols, and governing structures that could manage resources and populations across vast territories. The mystery deepens when you consider Kincaid's relationship to Cahokia. The two sites were clearly connected, sharing similar pottery styles, architectural techniques, and ceremonial practices. But were they allies, rivals, or something more complex? Archaeological evidence suggests periods of cooperation and periods of competition, a dynamic political relationship that shifted over time as circumstances changed. The abandonment of Kincaid is equally mysterious. Like so many Mississippian sites, it was gradually depopulated during the 13th and 14th centuries, but the reasons remain unclear. Climate change, resource depletion, political upheaval, and disease have all been proposed, but none explain why such a successful and well-connected center would simply fade away. Some conspiracy theorists suggest that Kincaid was deliberately destroyed or abandoned to hide evidence of advanced political systems that challenge conventional narratives about pre-Columbian America. While there's no archaeological support for such claims, they reflect the genuine puzzle that Kincaid represents: a sophisticated political center that achieved remarkable success and then vanished, leaving only questions buried in the earth. Chapter 6: Emerald Mound, the Satellite Mystery. About 40 miles southeast of Cahokia, rising from the Illinois prairie like an ancient sentinel, stands a mystery that might be even more puzzling than the great city itself. Emerald Mound and its associated village site represent something unique in the Mississippian world, a major ceremonial center that was clearly connected to Cahokia's influence but maintained its own distinct identity and purposes. What makes Emerald so fascinating isn't just its size, it's its timing and positioning. This massive earthwork was constructed during Cahokia's peak period of influence, yet it was built far enough away to suggest either independence or a very special kind of dependency. Was Emerald a satellite city, an outpost of Cahokian power, or was it something more complex, a regional center with its own agenda that happened to share cultural practices with its larger neighbor? The mound itself is impressive by any standard, rising nearly 30 feet above the surrounding floodplain and covering several acres at its base. It represents an enormous investment of labor and resources by whatever community built it. But unlike Cahokia's mounds, which were part of a vast urban complex, Emerald seems more focused, more specialized in its purposes. Archaeological excavations have revealed that the village surrounding Emerald Mound was substantial, housing perhaps several hundred families during its peak occupation. But the layout is different from what we see at Cahokia. The houses are arranged in ways that suggest different social organization, possibly more egalitarian in some respects, more rigidly hierarchical in others. The pottery found at Emerald tells a fascinating story of cultural connection and independence. Many styles clearly derive from Cahokian traditions, showing that the people here shared artistic and technological innovations with the larger center. But other pottery styles are unique to this site, suggesting local innovations and possibly different ceremonial or domestic practices. Trade goods tell a similar story. Materials from distant sources, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, all flow through Emerald just as they do through Cahokia. But the proportions are different. The specific items chosen suggest different priorities or different trading relationships. It's as if Emerald was plugged into the same economic networks as Cahokia, but was using them for its own distinct purposes. The timing of construction phases at Emerald raises even more questions. Some sections of the mound appear to have been built before Cahokia reached its peak, suggesting that this site might have been established independently and only later brought into Cahokia's sphere of influence. Other construction phases clearly coincide with major building episodes at Cahokia, implying coordinated planning across the region. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Emerald Mound is what appears to be evidence of specialized ceremonial activities that weren't practiced at Cahokia itself. Excavations have uncovered unusual arrangements of artifacts, distinctive fire hearths, and what seem to be offering deposits that suggest ceremonies or rituals unique to this location. Recent ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed that Emerald's subsurface is far more complex than the visible mound suggests. There appear to be earlier construction phases buried beneath the current structure, possibly representing different cultural groups or different ceremonial purposes over time. Some features suggest that this location was considered sacred long before the major mound was constructed. The relationship between Emerald and Cahokia becomes even more puzzling when you consider the environmental context. Emerald sits in prime agricultural land, with access to diverse resource zones that would have made it economically self-sufficient. Unlike some satellite sites that clearly depended on larger centers for